Hey class, I want to share with you guys some basic processing in Lightroom to help you with some of your development this week. And I thought I would take this shot from Olympic National Park that I captured about a year ago that really illustrates beautifully backlit scene in the way the light is um, illuminating this small tree against a darker forest. Now the first thing I want to do for the shot, because some of the stuff down here is a little bright and distracting, is to do a bit of a crop on it. So I'm going to bring this from the original 2:3 ratio into a 4:5 ratio. And I'm going to place it right about here, okay? So right now it's a little bit stronger already because I've gotten rid of some of these distracting elements at the bottom. Next thing I want to look at are my lens corrections. I want to click on my Remove Chromatic Aberration and enable my profile view. For some reason that's not coming through, but I know this was shot with a Nikon and it was shot with the 70 to 200 2.8. All right, so what that's going to do there is it's going to help to correct for any sort of distortion or vignetting on the edges. The next thing I want to do is choose a working profile over here. And for this, because it's a very high dynamic range scene, I'm going to choose the Adobe Neutral profile to bring out a little bit more shadow detail in the back. I can darken that down if I want to, but this is a very good starting point on the image. The next thing I want to look at is my white balance. And I will just dial in an auto setting in Lightroom, and that cools it down a little too much. So I'm going to warm it back up to really bring out that beautiful early morning light. And then I'm going to go ahead and adjust the exposure up a little bit and begin to pull the shadows back. So I want this to be a little darker in the background than it is up front. Okay, that way that the tree that's being backlit will really stand out nicely. Now I don't want to clip out my blacks completely, so I'll probably use a radial tool to darken areas around the tree, but first I want to work on the global tones in the image. What I'd like to do next is zoom in on the shot, and I am at 2:1, but I want to be at 1:1, and I want to add a little bit of texture to bring out some finer details and a little bit of clarity. And then I'm going to come back out and add a little bit of dehaze as well to bring up some of that global contrast. Next thing I'm going to do is add a little vibrance and saturation, but instead of doing it up here in the basic tab, I prefer to do it down here in the calibration tab. And what I'd like to do is find the primary color that is least represented in the scene. And for this image, it's going to be blue. So I'm going to take the blue saturation slider and move it up to increase saturation in the image. I'm going to come up to about 50 or 60 points of saturation and really bring out some of the beautifully saturated color in the shot. The next thing I want to do is sharpen the shot. So I'm going to come into the Detail tab. And instead of just pulling the sharpening slider up, I'm going to first create a mask because there's some areas in the image that I don't want to sharpen, particularly in a scene like this, the deeper shadows. If I sharpen those, I may add some noise or some grain into my image, and I would like to try to avoid that if possible. So I'm going to hold down the Alt Option key, click on the masking slider, and start to move that over until I see an appropriate mask being built. What I'm looking for here is the areas that have good texture and good light to come out as white on the mask, and the areas that are a little deeper in shade to go black, so I don't add the sharpening to the areas that are in black. And this mask looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to let go, and I'm going to change the radius from 1.0 to 0.5. I'm going to zoom in on the shot so I can really see what's happening. And I'm going to adjust the sharpening up all the way to 150. And just to bring out the absolute finest detail in the image without over sharpening the shot because I've built a mask around it. Next up is I want to look at my split toning. Split toning is something I use occasionally to add a little bit more color into my highlights and sometimes into my shadows. For this shot, I'm not going to add any into the shadows, but I'm going to add a little bit of warmth into those highlights. And then I'm going to hold down the Alt Option key, and clicking on the hue, I can decide the absolute best hue or tone of that color. And I think that looks pretty good right there. And then I can adjust the saturation up just to bring out a little bit more shine and a little warmer light inside of those highlights. Now what I want to do is I want to sort of darken the forest around this tree and make it a little bit more dramatic. So I'm going to grab my radial tool, and this is something that we would call a targeted adjustment. A lot of the adjustments that we do in Lightroom are what we call global adjustments, but by using these tools at the top, including the graduated filter, the radial, and the brush, we can do targeted adjustments. So I'm going to draw an oval and place it right about here. And then I can adjust the size of that oval and how far I want the light to spread out into the image. Turning invert off allows me to adjust what's on the outside of the radial brush. Leaving invert on will allow me to adjust what's inside of it. So I'm going to adjust what's on the outside, and I'm simply going to be pulling the exposure back for this, creating a little bit more of a spotlight in the image. And then making sure that I have my feathering moved out to about 75 to 80 so that the adjustment is seamless to the viewer. And you can see right there how much I've drawn attention in the processing to the backlit tree. Now I want to make these highlights shine a little bit more, so I'm going to open up the tone curve and I'm going to pull my highlight region slider over to increase the highlights in the image. And it's looking much, much better at this point. What I'd like to do now is move the image into Photoshop and clone out some distracting elements in the scene. So I'm going to right click on the image and come into Edit in Adobe Photoshop CC. All right, here we go. The first thing I'm going to do is work off of my layers. So I'm going to bring my workspace back into photography, and I'm going to work off the layers palette down here. So I want to create a duplicate layer for this cloning. So I'm going to go Command or Control J. And then I'm going to grab my L for my lasso. And some of the areas down here that are a little brightly lit, like this fern that's coming out that I don't love, I'm going to make a selection around it. And then I'm going to come up here to Edit, go to Fill, and click on Content Aware. Okay, just cleaning up the image a little bit. Some of the smaller elements like this, I can use a healing brush. So I'm going to zoom in on the shot. I'm going to grab J, type J for my healing brush, and just make sure that I clone out any little distracting elements that I don't want in the photo. Like for instance, down here, this bit of foliage that is slightly out of focus. We don't need that, so that's coming out. And I want to look in the background and look for some of these highlights that I don't want in the shot. And I'm going to clone some of those out as well. Those will tend to distract the viewer and lead their eye deeper into the frame. I don't want the eye to go deep into the frame for the shot. I want it to stay out in the foreground, focusing on that beautiful tree. Okay, so that looks a little bit better. Those little minor touches can make a huge difference in the overall quality of the image. But let's go a little bit further here. Let's work on our highlights a little more. I'm going to come into my TK, which is my Tony Kuiper actions, which allow me to create very specific masks. So I'm going to choose a Lights 2 mask to try to highlight the tree, which it did very nicely. Then I'm going to come down into my Layers, Adjustments, and go to Curves. I'm going to take that curve and I'm going to move it up, and I'm going to increase the brightness in that tree a little bit more. Now, I've lost a little bit of color saturation when I did that, so I'm going to change the RGB from RGB to red now, and I'm going to increase the reds in the highlights. Okay, so you can see how we're bringing that tree out a little bit more, and that's looking pretty good at this point. All right, let's see if we can go a little bit further here. I'm going to go ahead and dodge in a little bit more detail into some of the shadows in the background. So I'm going to come up to my TK panel and look for an appropriate mask in the darks that allows me to just bring in a little bit more detail into my dark areas. I'm going to come up to Layer and go to Dodge. Now that gives me a Dodge Burn layer. And with that layer, I can, with a brush, paint white into the image, thereby increasing some of the exposure in just the darker areas because I have a mask associated with it. So now I'm just going to just come in, and any area in the shot that I feel needs a little bit more brightness value, I can bring that up just a little bit. And this mask does a really good job of limiting that adjustment to that darker tonal value, not affecting my midtones, not affecting my highlights in the image. So you can see right there, I've brought out just a little bit more detail into the shot. And then finally, I'm going to add a very custom vignette to the shot to once again just accentuate that light on the tree. I'm going to go Shift, Option, Command, E. That on a PC would be Shift, Alt, Control, E to create a pixel-bearing layer. I'm then going to grab my rectangle marquee tool, and I'm going to draw a box out into the image and center it. I then want to go up here to Select and Inverse. And now I'm going to add a mask. So I click right here where it says Add Layer Mask. Now I have a layer mask worked off of that selection I just made on the image. I'm now going to change the blending mode of this layer from normal to multiply. See, it has like a black frame around it now. I want to turn that into a bit of a darkening vignette. So I'm going to double click on the mask, and then in my Properties tab, I'm going to pull the feather slider over very far. Really feather out that darkening on the edges. And then I'll simply come down to the layer that I just made this adjustment on and take the opacity to 0, and now I'm going to season to taste by just moving it up a little bit and thereby darkening just the edges of the frame, and once again keeping the viewer engaged on the subject of the image, which is this backlit tree. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you have any questions, just leave them down in the comment section below.